For those looking at a Ram 1500 in Australia, there is now a new specification to ponder. Sitting in between Express and Laramie is the new Ram Warlock, which brings black exterior styling, Ram box on the back, and a handful of nice touches on the inside. What's familiar is the driveline, a 5.7 litre Hemi V8, naturally aspirated and producing 291 kilowatts and 556 newton meters. That runs through an 8-speed automatic gearbox with selectable 4-wheel drive and a low-range transfer case. While we have reviewed the Ram a handful of times before, including this Warlock, this time we're doing something a little bit different. A quick look at a map found an interesting landmark just near us, Mount Warlock. Can you get to it? Is it accessible? Is it amazing? We don't know, but we thought the best way to find out was to jump in a 4-wheel drive and look for ourselves. And of course, we had to choose the namesake car, a Ram Warlock. So with a tub loaded up with all the gear we needed, including a KTM 350 dirt bike, we made the pilgrimage from Sydney and across the Blue Mountains. No better way to start a great road trip than with a great pie, and this is one of my favourite spots on the way out to the mountains. I've opted for my personal favourite. It's the Big Breakfast Pie. Arguably the best $9 you'll ever spend in your life. This pie is seriously delicious. A little bit different to your usual pie, quite big, so it's kind of like the Ram of pies in a way. But anyway, I'm gonna eat this, good fuel for the road, get behind the wheel and get moving. Warlock works well for this journey thanks to that Ram box setup which comes as standard. We're going to test it out with cold drinks, some lunch and a bag of ice, along with a stack of recovery gear on the other side. While it's safe to say that this Ram isn't the perfect city car, out here on the open road is where it's very strong. It's a big car with soft suspension and a big engine. It's a recipe that you don't get too often these days. Cars are getting bigger, yes, but engines are downsizing. They're being turbocharged and that sort of thing for emissions and a lot of other reasons. So a big engine like this is increasingly rare these days. The big question on everyone's lips about this Ram is fuel economy. Big truck, big V8, it's got to be a fuel guzzler, right? Yes and no. This is probably a lot more efficient than you might give it credit for. It does things like cylinder deactivation, and you can get respectable fuel economy for a big rig like this one. So the average is currently sitting at 15 litres per 100 Ks. Now keep in mind, we've just come up and over the Blue Mountains, so pretty much constantly uphill leaving Sydney. I reckon we can get that average down a little bit more over the next couple of days as we road trip through on the other side of the mountains here, so I'll keep you up to date with where it sits. Unlike the big heavy duty Rams that have leaf springs in the back and a solid front axle, this is independent up front and we've got coil springs at the back, which is unlike most other dual cab utes. And you've got a truck that doesn't ride like a truck whatsoever. It's actually much more car-like, although yes, it is a lot bigger. Steering is slow and cumbersome by car standards, but once you're in it and driving it, you get used to it and it feels normal and it works. On long drives like this, it's all about one-handed comfort really. You can sit back, get comfy in your chair. This has electric adjustment. It's a nice big chair as well, so it's perfectly comfortable. And just mow down the Ks, and I think that's really the strength of this Ram. And it wasn't long before we traded bitumen in for dirt, turning onto some bush tracks near the well-known Jenolan Caves area. According to our map, Mount Warlock and the Warlock Trail was a short drive into the bush. We made it to Mount Warlock, or at least the start of the Warlock Fire Trail, but unfortunately it's closed to vehicles, walkers only. So if you're really keen, you can put your hiking boots on. About 3 kilometers that way, you will get to Mount Warlock. However, we want to do a little bit more exploring behind the wheel. So we're going to stop for lunch here, maybe have a cold drink. Yep, there's a lot of ice still left in there, and see what else we can find a bit later. We might even find something that will challenge this Warlock a little bit more off-road. Although it's disappointing not to park our own Warlock on Mount Warlock, we still had a good day of exploring ahead of us. So it wasn't long before we speared off back into the bush to do some 4-wheel driving. The area surrounding Hampton is mostly state forest, populated with a few kangaroos, a handful of wombats, and millions of radiata pine. There are seemingly hundreds of unmarked and unnamed tracks through this area, perfect for someone looking to escape the confines of town for a while and just amble around in the forest. My favourite feature undoubtedly of this Warlock is the ram box, which is set up in the back here. Normally it's around a $5,000 option for rams. It's not cheap, but here it's standard. Firstly, it actually locks and unlocks with central locking. You can keep things in here, out of sight, secure, and out of the weather as well. I've managed to fit practically 2 recovery kits in the front here. There's a tyre repair kit, some other stuff. I've even fit in a chainsaw. So that shows you how big this thing is and how useful it is if you're out in the bush all the time. That's a Stihl MS231. That's not their smallest saw by any measure, but it just fits in. You've got some switchable lights here on the inside for when you're fumbling around for gear in the dark, but there is one more cool party trick with this ram box, but I'll show you on the other side. Because you've got rubber bungs in the front and back of these ram boxes, you can actually use them as an esky. And that's what we've done here. We threw a bag in here earlier with our lunch, a couple of cold drinks and that sort of thing, but unfortunately it's already turned to water. These ram boxes aren't insulated, so you will get through ice relatively quickly. But I have to note it has been a warm day today, sort of 30 degrees or a little bit over. We've gone about 5 or 6 hours on one bag of ice. But reminds me, with a bit of water in there, you can use these as a live bait tank if you are a keen fisherman. It's not a bad idea. Another cool feature with this ram box is this handy multi-purpose partition. Because the tray is effectively squared off with those storage boxes on each side, this can run in multiple spots and effectively split your tub into different sizes, but it also operates like this, a handy tub extender. Flip the tailgate down, flip this thing out as well and mount it into the corners of the tailgate. And now you've got an extended tub for loading all of your stuff in. We can now fit this KTM motorbike in the back quite easily, plus loading ramps, a bunch of other gear, so you really can have all the gear and no idea. We're going one better than just a day. We had 2 days booked in the bush, and this time, this area proved to be a great weekend destination for anyone with a 4-wheel drive or a dirt bike and a sense of adventure. It just so happened that we had both a 4-wheel drive and a dirt bike, so it was time to give this KTM a bit of a run. And while I'm personally in the running to be the worst licensed rider in Australia, we brought along Sal, who was able to give this KTM a good blast in the bush. State forests like this one are great areas to have some fun, either behind the wheel or in the saddle. But it's got to be provided you've got all the necessary permits and registrations sorted. And of course, don't forget about safety equipment. And if you don't have any phone reception in this area, it's worth considering some emergency communications to contact the outside world if something goes wrong. One particular challenge we found with the KTM was a narrow, steep and slippery hill climb. And it proved to be a good test because this big ram did start to feel a little out of place on such a tight track. With some creative lines chosen to skirt past the trees and without any diff locks, the ram was actually much better than I thought on a slow, low-range climb. Although the size of the ram is no doubt a hindrance in some situations, the long wheelbase and width does lend a sense of stability to the ram. Like at high speeds, it does soak up rough terrain in low range nicely. It did scrabble at times, but managed to claw forward without any issues. Underbody ground clearance is good also, if you discount those low slung side steps. 33-inch tyres offer a big footprint for grip, and the coil sprung rear end has a little bit of articulation on offer as well. While not everyone will buy a ram for the intention of going off-road, it's worth noting that it's better than you might expect. As you would expect, this Ram 1500 is comfortable and spacious on the inside. This Warlock specification is kind of a mix of Express and Laramie. For example, you don't get the flash steering wheel, you don't get the heated seats, and you also don't get those cool adjustable foot pedals as well. But the seats are leather, and you do get a good big infotainment display here. That's got Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, native navigation, and a good operating system. There's also dual zone climate control there, a built-in brake controller, and stacks of storage. Where the steering wheel used to be before they converted it to right-hand drive in Australia, there's storage there, there's a glove box below, a dual opening glove box here, which is absolutely massive, spots for your phone, cup holders here, cup holders in the doors as well. This thing is made to be comfortable and spacious. That theme of comfortable spaciousness continues in the second row as well. There's more space in the back there that most other dual cab utes could only dream of. And if you haven't got people in the back, it's actually really handy for storage as well. Those seats flip up, there's a base that folds out as well, so you've got a flat load area. And there's even cool little storage pods in the floor as well. They're actually really big and handy, out of sight, so you might want to put some valuables in there while you're driving around. And if you're wondering how our long-term fuel economy test went, it did improve slightly, but not by a lot. We averaged 14.9 litres per 100 kilometres, and that included a lot of driving in a lot of different situations. But we did see stints of around 11 litres per 100 on the highway. Come to the end of our weekend out in the bush with this Ram Warlock, and I have to say I've been impressed with it and its off-road ability. You might not expect this thing to be any good off the beaten track, but despite its size, it's actually quite capable. It is, at the end of the day, however, a big rig, so you do have to pay attention on the narrow tracks, the tight turns and that sort of thing. You got to pick your line, and you might be scratching paint faster than other utes. However, because it is wider and longer than other utes, it's got a sense of stability as well. On that steep, slippery climb, this thing felt great from behind the wheel. Even though it's got factory highway terrain tyres and no locking diffs, it didn't slip around at all. That's pretty impressive. And of course, if you want to go harder off-road in one of these things, there's a lot of aftermarket support for them. Wheels, tyres, suspension, locking diffs, all that sort of thing is available. Special mention to the Rambox package on this Warlock as well. It's standard and I've used it to great effect. I've got the chainsaw in there, all the recovery gear. We've used it as an esky as well to keep our lunch and drinks cold. And of course, the bike fits in with the extended tub. Do you think this Ram, this big Yank tank, is right at home in the Australian bush, or is it still a bit of a fish out of water? Would you prefer something a little bit smaller, maybe a little bit more nimble? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're here, hit like, subscribe to Car Advice on YouTube, and head over to caradvice.com for the full story.